A woman's worth is not measured by the label on her clothes, but by the fire in her soul and the resolve in her heart. In the heart of a bustling city, inside a restaurant shimmering with wealth and status, a young waitress named Kate was about to learn this lesson in the cruelest way possible. Dressed in a worn, faded uniform, she was seen as nothing more than a ghost, a servant meant to be invisible. But when a brash millionaire, Brendan Holloway, decides to make her the target of his public ridicule, he makes a catastrophic miscalculation. He couldn't possibly know that the woman he was mocking for her simple attire was Catherine Valerius, the secret CEO of the entire hospitality empire, and he had just lit a fuse that would incinerate his world. Catherine Valerius adjusted the ill-fitting polyester collar of her waitress uniform, the fabric scratching against her neck. The reflection staring back at her from the polished surface of a dormant espresso machine was a stranger. Gone was the bespoke Loro Piana suit, the subtle shimmer of her Cartier watch, and the confident, commanding aura of the CEO of Ethelgard Hospitality. In her place was Kate, a woman with tired eyes, hair pulled back in a severe functional bun, and an expression of manufactured deference carefully painted on her face. Her shoes deliberately scuffed, and a half size too big were already beginning to pinch. It had been 6 months since her father, Jonathan Valerius, had passed away, leaving her the keys to a global empire of luxury hotels and restaurants. He was a titan, a man who started with a single diner and built a legacy on a simple principle. The soul of a business is found in the people who scrub its floors, not the ones who sit in its boardrooms. Lately, Catherine felt that soul withering. Profit margins were up, but guest reviews for their flagship restaurant, the Gilded Compass, were peppered with words like cold, impersonal, and disappointing. Staff turnover was at an all-time high. Her board, a council of silver-haired men who saw the business in spreadsheets and percentages, advised a simple solution: cut costs, streamline, and replace experienced, more expensive staff with younger, cheaper labor. The suggestion felt like a betrayal of everything her father stood for. So Catherine had devised her own plan, a deep-cover immersion into the heart of the problem. She had created a fake resume, aced a perfunctory interview with a harried assistant manager, and was now starting her first day as a junior waitress at her own company's crown jewel. The manager who had officially hired her, a veteran named Mr. Henderson, was a relic from her father's era. His eyes were kind, but weary, etched with the fine lines of someone fighting a battle he knew he was losing. "Welcome aboard, Kate," he said, his voice a low rumble. "The rules are simple. Anticipate the guests' needs. Be invisible but always available. And whatever you do, don't get on Jenna's bad side." Jenna was a senior waitress with sharp, predatory eyes and a smile that never quite reached them. She moved through the opulent dining room like a shark, her movements efficient, and her focus locked on the tables she knew would yield the highest tips. She gave Kate a single dismissive once-over, her gaze lingering on the worn seams of Kate's uniform. "Try to keep up, newbie," Jenna sneered, not bothering to lower her voice. "And for God's sake, iron your uniform tomorrow. You look like you slept in a bus station." The sting of the insult was sharp, but Catherine absorbed it, filing it away. This was data. This was the reality of the floor. Her first few hours were a blur of controlled chaos. She learned the complex table numbering system, the dizzying array of specials, and the unspoken hierarchy of the staff. She ferried heavy trays of food, the porcelain plates decorated with foams and drizzles that cost more than her supposed weekly rent. She polished endless streams of wine glasses until her fingers were raw. Through it all, she observed. She saw how Jenna would ignore the smaller tables, focusing her charm on parties, ordering expensive bottles of Chateau Margaux. She saw the younger kitchen staff led by a hard-working student named Leo, being run ragged, their efforts barely acknowledged. She felt the palpable tension between the front and back of the house, a chasm of resentment and miscommunication. Her father had once told her, "A restaurant is a living organism, Catherine. If one part is sick, the whole body suffers." The gilded compass was suffering. It was a beautiful facade, a gilded cage hiding a creeping decay. The shimmer of the chandeliers and the gleam of the polished mahogany couldn't hide the exhaustion in Mr. Henderson's eyes, or the open contempt in Jenna's. Late in the evening, a couple was seated in her section. They were celebrating an anniversary, their conversation quiet and intimate. Catherine made sure their water glasses were always full, that their bread basket was replenished, and served their entrees with a quiet, genuine smile. When they left, they pulled her aside. "Thank you," the woman said warmly. "You are wonderful. So attentive." The man pressed a folded $50 bill into her hand. "This is for you. Don't let the sharks put it in the main tip pool." It was more than just money. It was a flicker of connection, a reminder of what the business was supposed to be about. As she tucked the bill into her apron pocket, her gaze drifted across the room and landed on a table being seated in Jenna's section. A man with slicked back hair and a suit that screamed "new money" was laughing boisterously. His name was Brendan Holloway, a real estate developer known for his aggressive tactics and ostentatious displays of wealth. Beside him, a woman named Tiffany Dubois, whose fame seemed to exist solely on Instagram, was already angling her phone for a selfie. Catherine's instincts prickled. She had seen Holloway's name before in a preliminary report about developers sniffing around the historic building the restaurant leased. This was an unwelcome coincidence. Holloway and his date were exactly the kind of high-value clientele Jenna fawned over. Catherine watched as Jenna approached their table, her entire demeanor transforming into one of fawning adoration. The organism of the restaurant was showing more of its sickness, and Catherine had a sinking feeling she was about to see the worst of its symptoms up close. The next few weeks forged Catherine into Kate. The soft skin of her hands became calloused from carrying hot plates and handling harsh cleaning chemicals. The ache in her feet became a constant, unwelcome companion. The world of boardrooms, quarterly reports, and strategic forecasting felt 1,000,000 miles away, replaced by the immediate, pressing realities of side salads, steak temperatures, and which table needed its check. She learned to navigate the complex social ecosystem of the staff. She became friends with Leo, the young man from the kitchen. He was studying architecture at Columbia and worked 2 jobs to pay his tuition. He had a quick wit and a sharp eye, often pointing out inefficiencies in the kitchen workflow that went ignored by management. "They redesigned the menu last month," he told her one night as they shared a staff meal of leftover risotto. "Added all these complicated dishes. Looks great on Instagram, but it doubled our prep time. That's why entrees are taking 45 minutes on a busy night. But no one asked us." He was right. It was a classic top-down decision made by a corporate chef in a test kitchen with no regard for the real-world implications. It was a decision she had technically approved. The irony was a bitter pill. Jenna's disdain for Kate, however, only grew. It was a campaign of 1,000 tiny cuts. She would accidentally trip Kate in the narrow corridor to the kitchen, sending a tray of water glasses crashing to the floor. She would misinform her about a table's allergy, forcing Kate to face the wrath of both the guest and the chef. She would spread whispers among the staff that Kate was incompetent, slow, and probably stealing from the tip jar. "You have to stand up to her," Leo urged. "It's not worth it," Catherine would reply, maintaining her cover. "I just want to do my job and go home." But it was becoming harder to ignore. The cruelty was a symptom of the restaurant's deeper malaise. With Mr. Henderson overwhelmed and the corporate office her own office completely disconnected. A culture of fear and backstabbing had been allowed to fester, and Jenna was its chief predator. The staff who played her game got the best sections and the easiest side work. Those who didn't like Kate were ostracized and punished. One Tuesday evening, Brendan Holloway and Tiffany Dubois returned. They specifically requested Jenna's section. From her station across the room, Catherine watched the performance. Holloway held court, his voice booming as he bragged about a recent deal, a hostile takeover of a smaller firm. Tiffany laughed at all the right moments, her phone never far from her hand, documenting every course, every clink of their crystal glasses. "He's trying to buy this building," Leo muttered to Catherine as he passed by with a heavy tub of dirty dishes. "Heard him talking about it last time. Wants to gut the whole block and put up some glass monstrosity." The casual comment sent a jolt of alarm through Catherine. The report she'd seen was more than just exploratory. Holloway was a serious threat. Her father had loved this building, a pre-war gem with intricate moldings and soaring ceilings. He always said it had good bones. Holloway saw it as a tear down. This undercover mission had just become infinitely more critical. It wasn't just about fixing service standards anymore. It was about saving the soul of the company's flagship. Later that night, as Catherine was clearing a nearby table, she couldn't help but overhear their conversation. "And the management here is just asleep at the wheel," Holloway was saying, gesturing dismissively with a fork. "The whole Ethelgard brand is getting stale, faded glory. It's ripe for the picking. The old man Valerius, he's gone. His daughter is running things now, some little princess who probably doesn't know a balance sheet from a wine list." Tiffany giggled. "You're terrible, Bren. I'm a realist, babe," he said, taking a large gulp of his wine. "And I see an opportunity. This place, this whole building is a gold mine, waiting for someone with the guts to tear down the old and build the new." The casual, arrogant dismissal of her and her father's legacy was a physical blow. Catherine's hand tightened on the tray she was holding, her knuckles white. She had to force herself to breathe, to remember she was Kate, the invisible waitress. She turned to walk away, but as she did, her worn-out shoe caught on the thick carpet's edge. She stumbled, and a single empty bread plate slid from the tray and clattered onto the marble floor. It didn't break, but the sound was loud in the hushed dining room. Every head in the vicinity turned. Holloway's eyes locked onto her. A slow, cruel smirk spread across his face. "Speak of the devil," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Here's the faded glory in the flesh. Can't even carry a plate. It's a metaphor for the whole operation." Jenna rushed over her face, a mask of panicked apology. "Mr. Holloway, I am so sorry. The new girl is clumsy." She shot Catherine a look of pure venom. "Get her out of my sight," Holloway commanded, waving his hand. "She's ruining the ambiance." Heart pounding, face burning with a humiliation so profound it felt like a physical heat. Catherine gathered the plate and retreated towards the kitchen, the sound of Holloway's and Tiffany's laughter following her like a poison dart. In the sweltering heat of the kitchen, leaning against a stainless steel counter, she finally let out a shaky breath. This wasn't just about a rude customer anymore. This was personal. Brendan Holloway hadn't just insulted a waitress, he had declared war on Catherine Valerius, and he had no idea who he was dealing with. A week later, the storm Catherine had been anticipating finally broke, and it was more brutal than she could have imagined. Brendan Holloway booked the restaurant's exclusive private dining room, the Founder's Room, for a dinner party. It was a gathering of investors and city influencers, a power play designed to showcase his influence and vision. And he had made one specific, chilling request he wanted: the clumsy waitress Kate to be one of the servers for his party. Mr. Henderson had tried to refuse. "Sir, she's very junior. I have more experienced staff." "No." Holloway had insisted over the phone, his voice laced with malicious amusement. "I want her. I find her. Entertaining. A perfect example of the service I'm telling everyone about." It was a trap, a public performance for his own cruel sport. Catherine knew it, and so did Mr. Henderson, whose apologetic eyes conveyed his powerlessness. Her own corporate policies designed to empower managers had been eroded over time, leaving them beholden to the whims of wealthy, demanding clients. Refusing a high roller's request was now a fireable offense. "I'll do it," Catherine said, her voice steady. To back down would be to fail this entire test. She had to see it through. That evening she donned the same uniform, now a suit of armor she was wearing into battle. Jenna was assigned as the lead waitress for the party, a detail that only sharpened the dread. Jenna's smile was triumphant as she handed Catherine a tray laden with champagne flutes. "Try not to drop these, Kate. They're baccarat. Each one costs more than your monthly salary." The founder's room was her father's sanctuary. The walls were panelled with dark walnut, and his portrait hung over the marble fireplace. Seeing it now as a servant about to be humiliated felt like a desecration. The party was in full swing when she entered. Brendan Holloway was at the head of the table holding court. Tiffany was beside him, phone in hand, live streaming clips to her followers with the hashtag #TashaPowerDinner. For the first hour, Catherine performed her duties with flawless precision. She moved silently, refilling water and wine, clearing plates, with an economy of motion that belied her supposed inexperience. She was determined to give them no ammunition. But Holloway was patient. He was waiting for his moment. It came during the main course. As she was serving a guest, Holloway deliberately stuck his foot out. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible movement. Catherine's ankle caught, and she lurched forward. By sheer force of will and a desperate twisting recovery, she managed to keep the heavy plate of roasted duck from flying across the table. However, a small amount of the cherry reduction sauce, a deep crimson liquid, splashed from the plate onto the pristine white cuff of Holloway's custom-made Turnbull and Asser shirt. The table fell silent. Holloway looked down at the tiny red stain as if he'd been shot. He slowly lifted his gaze to meet Catherine's. The smirk she had seen before was back, but this time it was chillingly triumphant. "Well, well, well," he said, his voice dangerously low, yet loud enough for everyone to hear. "The disaster artist strikes again." Tiffany immediately aimed her phone at Catherine, the small red light of the recording now active. "Oh my God, Brendan, your shirt!" she gasped with theatrical horror. "It's nothing, darling," he said, though his eyes were locked on Catherine. He stood up, towering over her. "But it does prove my point, doesn't it, everyone?" He addressed his guests now. "I was just telling you about the decay at the core of this establishment. It's not just the dated decor or the tired menu. It's the people. They hire from the bottom of the barrel. People with no grace, no skill, no pride." He took a step closer to Catherine, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was still perfectly audible. "Look at her. The clothes don't even fit. The shoes are scuffed. She looks like she belongs on a street corner, not in a fine dining establishment." "This," he said, flicking his finger towards her uniform, "is what happens when a legacy is left to crumble. It gets infested with this." Every word was a hammer blow. Catherine stood frozen, her face a blank mask, but inside a volcano of rage was building. She could feel the stares of 20 pairs of eyes, a mixture of pity, embarrassment, and cruel amusement. She saw Jenna in the corner, a flicker of a smile on her lips. This was his plan all along, to use her as a prop in his argument for why the Gilded Compass, and by extension, her father's entire legacy deserved to be torn down. He wasn't finished. He reached into his wallet, pulled out a crisp $100 bill, and crumpled it in his fist. He then deliberately dropped it on the floor next to the sauce stain. "Here," he sneered, "for the dry cleaning. Or maybe you can buy yourself a new pair of shoes, something that doesn't make you a public hazard." The humiliation was absolute. It was a calculated act of cruelty designed to break her spirit. Tiffany's phone was still recording, capturing every searing second. But as Catherine looked down at the crumpled bill on the floor, something inside her shifted. The humiliation began to recede, replaced by an ice-cold clarity. He thought he was breaking a poor, hapless waitress. He had no idea he was forging the resolve of a CEO. He thought he was winning an argument. He had no idea he was handing her the very weapon she would use to destroy him. Without a word, she knelt. Not to pick up the money, but to retrieve a napkin from her apron pocket. With steady hands, she carefully blotted the tiny stain on the carpet where the sauce had dripped. She then stood up, looked Brendan Holloway directly in the eye, and said in a clear, low voice, "My apologies, sir. I will inform Mr. Henderson so he can have the restaurant's insurance cover the damages to your shirt." She turned and walked out of the room, leaving the crumpled $100 bill lying on the floor. She didn't run. She didn't cry. Her exit was measured and dignified, the quietest and most powerful act of defiance she could muster. In the hallway she leaned against the wall, her heart hammering against her ribs, not from fear but from a newfound terrifying focus. The game had changed. This was no longer an investigation. It was a war. The video clip Tiffany posted titled, "Epic Waitress Fail at the Gilded Compass." So cringe was a minor sensation in their elite social circle. It was shared, commented on, and laughed at. For Catherine, it was a declaration of war burned onto the internet. Each condescending word from Holloway, each titter of laughter from his guests, became fuel for the fire now raging within her. She left the restaurant that night, not as the defeated Kate, but as Catherine Valerius, CEO, on a mission. She went straight to her penthouse apartment, the one she hadn't slept in for weeks, and walked into her home office. The quiet hum of her high-end computer was a welcome sound after the clatter of the restaurant kitchen. "Bring me everything you have on Brendan Holloway and Holloway Development," she said into her secure phone line to her head of security, a former MI6 agent named George. "Financials pending, deals partners, enemies, vulnerabilities. And I want to know everything about his interest in the 57th Street property, the one the Gilded Compass is in. I need it yesterday." While George's team mobilized, Catherine started her own more intimate investigation. She was no longer just observing the restaurant's culture. She was actively hunting for weaknesses Holloway might be exploiting. The first thread she pulled on was Jenna. The senior waitress's behavior had always been suspicious, her devotion to Holloway too pronounced for a simple customer-server relationship. The day after the disastrous dinner party, Catherine back in her guise as Kate saw her chance. During a lull in service, she saw Jenna tucked away in a quiet alcove, speaking animatedly into her phone in a hushed voice. Catherine busied herself polishing silverware at a nearby station, straining to listen. "No, he was brilliant," Jenna whispered. "He completely discredited the place. The video is making the rounds. Yes, the manager is a pushover. No morale is in the toilet, just like we wanted. The staff turnover is a huge help. Most of the experienced ones who were loyal to the old man are gone. Okay, let me know when the next payment will clear." A cold dread washed over Catherine. This was worse than she thought. Jenna wasn't just a bully. She was a mole. She was being paid to actively sabotage the restaurant from the inside, to drive down morale and service quality, making Holloway's case that the business was failing and the building was ripe for redevelopment. Jenna's cruelty, the constant staff churn, the unsolvable service issues, it was all part of a coordinated attack. The next piece of the puzzle fell into place 2 days later. Catherine saw unfamiliar men in hard hats taking measurements outside the restaurant's service entrance early in the morning. They were trying to be discreet, but to her now trained eye, their presence was a blaring alarm. She recognized the logo on their jackets, Apex Surveying, a firm frequently contracted by Holloway Development. They were assessing the building for demolition. That afternoon, George's preliminary report landed in her encrypted inbox. It was a dossier of ruthlessness. Holloway specialized in acquiring legacy properties by systematically devaluing them first. He would fund negative press exploit zoning loopholes and even orchestrate accidents to drive tenants out. His pursuit of the Gilded Compass building was aggressive and multi-pronged. The building itself was owned by a massive real estate investment trust, the Vanguard Property Group. According to the lease documents her father had signed decades ago, Ethelgard Hospitality had the right of first refusal if the owner ever decided to sell. This meant they had the legal right to match any offer before the building could be sold to someone else. So why hadn't Vanguard notified her of Holloway's offer? Catherine dug deeper, pulling up the correspondence files between her legal team and Vanguard. And there it was, buried in a subfolder from 2 months ago, a formal notice of a purchase offer from a shell corporation named Phoenix Ascendant LLC. Her own legal department, managed by a man she had inherited from the old board, had reviewed the offer. His official recommendation attached to the file was to waive their right of first refusal. His reasoning was thin. The current real estate market is volatile, and a significant capital outlay for property acquisition is not aligned with our Q3 streamlining objectives. The Gilded Compass's declining performance metrics do not justify the investment. Phoenix Ascendant LLC. It took George's team less than an hour to pierce the corporate veil. The sole proprietor was Brendan Holloway. The betrayal was staggering. Holloway wasn't just attacking her from the outside. He had tendrils reaching inside her own corporate structure. A saboteur on the restaurant floor and a collaborator, or at least a dangerously negligent executive in her own legal department. They had conspired to keep her in the dark, engineering the restaurant's decline to justify letting it be sold out from under her. Holloway's public humiliation of her as Kate was just the vicious icing on a very calculated cake. She sat back in her leather chair, the city lights twinkling below her. She now understood the full scope of the battlefield. Holloway thought he was swatting at a fly, unaware that the fly was weaving a web. He believed he was in control, manipulating a failing restaurant and a naive princess CEO. He had no idea that Kate, the clumsy waitress, had just uncovered his entire conspiracy, and Catherine Valerius, the CAO, was about to use that knowledge to set a trap of her own. She now had the why to save her father's legacy and the how. She would let Holloway walk right into the lion's den, confident he was the hunter, only to find out he had been the prey all along. Armed with the devastating truth, Catherine's perspective shifted. Every interaction at the restaurant was now viewed through a lens of strategy. She wasn't just enduring her role as Kate, she was using it. Her invisibility was her greatest asset. She focused first on the allies she had unknowingly made. Her bond with Leo, the architecture student from the kitchen, deepened. She saw in him not just a hard worker, but a brilliant mind stifled by a broken system. One evening, as they were cleaning up after a grueling shift, she broached the subject carefully. "Leo, you mentioned the kitchen workflow is inefficient." She began, her voice low. "If you could change anything, what would you do?" His eyes lit up. For the next 20 minutes, he spoke with a passion she hadn't seen before, sketching on a discarded napkin with a grease pencil. He reimagined the entire layout of the kitchen, moving stations, optimizing prep areas, and creating a more logical flow from receiving to plating. It was brilliant practical and would easily shave minutes off every order. "This is incredible, Leo," Catherine said, genuinely impressed. "You should show this to Mr. Henderson." Leo scoffed. "And what, he's a good guy, but he's drowning. Corporate sends down a new directive every week. They don't listen to us. We're just the cogs in the machine." "Maybe the right person just hasn't seen it yet," she replied, folding the napkin carefully and placing it in her pocket. In that moment, she wasn't just seeing a promising kitchen worker. She was seeing a future director of operations. Her next conversation was with Mr. Henderson. She approached him in his small, cluttered office at the end of a long night, feigning concern about her job security after the incident with Holloway. "Mr. Henderson, I'm worried. That man, Mr. Holloway, he seems to have a lot of influence. Am I going to be fired?" she asked, channeling the vulnerability of Kate. The weary manager sighed, rubbing his temples. "Don't you worry about Holloway, Kate. He's a bully. The real problem isn't him." He leaned forward, his voice dropping. "It's this place. It's like corporate wants us to fail. My budget's been slashed 3 times this year. I can't hire enough experienced servers, so I get rookies. I can't afford to get the good equipment repaired, so the ovens run cold. I send report after report upstairs, and all I get back is a memo about reducing napkin usage." He looked at her, his eyes pleading for understanding. "Jonathan Valerius. Mr. Valerius, the founder. He used to walk through the kitchen once a week. He knew every dishwasher by name. He'd ask me what I needed, and if it made sense, it was done. Now, there's just silence from the top. Just spreadsheets. His daughter. I'm sure she's a smart woman, but she doesn't understand. She's not her father." The words were a dagger to Catherine's heart, but they were also a priceless revelation. Her own board, in their aggressive pursuit of streamlining, had become Holloway's unwitting accomplices. They had been strangling the gilded compass, creating the very conditions of decay that Holloway was now using as justification for his takeover. Her own legal chief had advised against buying the building because its performance was poor, a performance the board itself had crippled. "Thank you, Mr. Henderson," Catherine said softly. "Thank you for being honest." She realized then that to save her father's legacy, she had to save it from itself. The enemy wasn't just Brendan Holloway. It was the soulless, profit-at-all-costs corporate culture that had taken root in her own company since her father's passing. The final piece of her plan required one more trip into the belly of the beast. Using a burner phone, she called the reservation line for the Gilded Compass. "I'd like to make a booking," she said, her voice digitally altered. "A very important business meeting for next Tuesday at 3 p.m. in the Founders' Room." "Of course, ma'am. For how many?" the host asked. 6, Catherine replied, and the reservation should be under the name Phoenix Ascendant LLC. She knew Holloway's ego wouldn't let him resist. A meeting at the very site of his conquest, it was the ultimate power move. She also knew that name would trigger alerts within Vanguard Property Group. The players would be assembled. Her plan was no longer just about exposing Holloway. It was about a full-scale corporate reset. She would use Holloway's own greed and arrogance to stage a coup not just against him, but against the decay within her own empire. She spent the weekend in a whirlwind of activity, not as Kate the waitress, but as Catherine the CEO. She met secretly with a trusted minority faction of her board members who had been loyal to her father. She prepared presentations, financial models, and a dossier of evidence that would shake the company to its core. She also took Leo's napkin sketch to a team of top restaurant designers who worked around the clock to turn it into a full-scale professional blueprint for a state-of-the-art kitchen renovation. On Monday, her last day as Kate, she worked her final shift. She was no longer just going through the motions. She looked at the worn carpets, the stressed staff, and the tired decor, not with despair, but with a fierce sense of purpose. She was saying goodbye to the rot. As she was leaving, Leo caught her arm. "Hey, Kate, are you okay? You seem different today." Catherine gave him a genuine smile, the first she had allowed herself in weeks. "I'm fine, Leo. Actually, I'm better than fine. I have a feeling things are about to change around here." He looked at her, puzzled by her sudden confidence. She simply said, "Keep that napkin safe. You never know who might want to see it." And with that, Kate the waitress walked out of the Gilded Compass for the last time. The next time she entered, it would be as Catherine Valerius, and she would not be serving the table. She would be turning it over completely. Tuesday afternoon, sunlight streamed through the tall arched windows of the founder's room, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The long mahogany table was polished to a mirror shine. At its head sat Brendan Holloway, radiating smug satisfaction. Flanking him were his lawyers and 2 executives from the Vanguard Property Group. Across from them sat 3 members of the Ethelgard Hospitality Board, including the legal chief, Mr. Peterson, who had recommended waiving their right to purchase the building. The mood was jovial, self-congratulatory. They were here to finalize the details of the sale. Holloway had already commissioned architectural renderings of the sleek, soulless glass tower that would replace the historic building. "As you can see," Holloway said, gesturing to a large portfolio on the table, "our vision for the Holloway Apex will revitalize this entire block. We're talking prime retail luxury condos, a landmark." Mr. Peterson from Ethelgard nodded obsequiously. "An impressive proposal, Brendan. We at Ethelgard feel this transition is in the best interest of our portfolio, allowing us to divest from an underperforming asset." The Vanguard executives murmured in agreement. The deal was all but done. Precisely at 3:15 p.m., the heavy oak doors to the founder's room swung open. A woman entered. She was not on the meeting agenda. She was tall and poised, dressed in a sharply tailored navy blue Alexander McQueen power suit. Her hair was styled in a sleek professional chignon, and her stride was confident, purposeful. On her wrist was the subtle gleam of a Patek Philippe watch. Her eyes, clear and sharp as diamonds, scanned the room, lingering for a fraction of a second on Brendan Holloway. Holloway stared, a flicker of confusion on his face. He knew her from somewhere. That face. But it was impossible. He nudged his lawyer. "Who is this is she with your team?" Mr. Peterson, the Ethelgard legal chief, stood up, his face paling. "Ms. Valerius, we weren't expecting you." The name hung in the air. Valerius. Brendan Holloway's smug expression dissolved, replaced by a mask of slack-jawed disbelief. The woman in the power suit was the clumsy, pathetic waitress. It was Kate. But it wasn't. The posture, the clothes, the aura of absolute command. It was a different person entirely. "Please sit, Mr. Peterson," Catherine said, her voice calm and cold as steel. It was the same voice, yet utterly transformed. It held none of Kate's deference. It held the authority of a queen surveying her court. She walked to the empty chair at the opposite head of the table and sat, placing a slim leather-bound folio in front of her. "I believe you've started without me. Let's get right to it, shall we?" 2 more figures entered the room and stood silently by the door. One was George, her head of security. The other was a woman carrying a stenographer's pad. The friendly meeting had just become a formal deposition. "Ms. Valerius, one of the Vanguard executives, stammered. "This is a private meeting to finalize the sale to Phoenix Ascendant LLC. Is it?" Catherine opened her folio. "Let's talk about Phoenix Ascendant LLC, a shell corporation registered in Delaware with a single owner, Mr. Brendan Holloway." Holloway had found his voice a mixture of bluster and panic. "This is highly irregular. What is the meaning of this? And who the hell are you really?" Catherine leaned forward, her eyes locking onto his. "You know who I am, Brendan. You just didn't realize it. For the past month, I've had the unique experience of being your server. You may know me as Kate." A wave of shock rippled through the room. Peterson looked like he was about to faint. Holloway's face cycled through a spectrum of colors from flushed red to ashen white. "Now," Catherine continued, her voice cutting through the stunned silence, "let's discuss this underperforming asset, an asset whose performance has been deliberately sabotaged from the inside." She slid a file across the table. "This is a transcript of a series of phone calls between Mr. Holloway's office and one of my senior waitresses, Jenna Miller. It details payments made to her in exchange for acts of sabotage designed to drive down service scores and increase staff turnover." She turned her gaze to Peterson. "And Mr. Peterson, let's discuss your recommendation to waive our company's legal right of first refusal, a right you failed to bring to my personal attention, a recommendation you based on performance metrics that you knew were being artificially suppressed by budget cuts you yourself authorized, cuts that strangled this restaurant's ability to function. Was it negligence, Mr. Peterson, or were you promised a corner office in the Holloway apex?" Peterson began to sputter, but Catherine silenced him with a raised hand. And finally, to our partners at Vanguard, she said, her tone softening slightly, but losing none of its iron. "I'm sure you were unaware that Mr. Holloway's offer was predicated on a campaign of corporate espionage and sabotage, a campaign that culminated in him publicly humiliating one of my employees," she let the word hang in the air, "in this very room to strengthen his case, an employee who happens to own a controlling interest in Ethelgard Hospitality." She paused, letting the full weight of her words settle. The hunter was trapped. The room was silent, save for the frantic scratching of the stenographer's pen. "The sale is off," Catherine declared, her voice ringing with finality. "Ethelgard Hospitality will be exercising its right of first refusal. We will be matching Mr. Holloway's offer. And furthermore, we will be filing a civil suit against Holloway Development for tortious interference. My security chief George has a copy of the filing for you, Brendan. I trust you'll find it entertaining." She stood up, her authority absolute. She had not raised her voice. She had not resorted to insults. She had simply laid out the facts, and with them she had dismantled Brendan Holloway's world piece by piece. "As for you, Mr. Peterson," she said, without looking at him, "George will escort you from the building. Your termination is effective immediately." She looked at Holloway one last time, the ghost of Kate the waitress in her eyes, but the fire of Catherine Valerius in her soul. "You were right about one thing, Brendan. This place did have some rot. I just had to come down here myself to find it and cut it out." With that, she turned and walked towards the door, leaving behind the wreckage of a multi-million-dollar deal and the shattered ego of a man who had mocked the wrong woman. The aftermath of the boardroom confrontation was not a quiet ripple. It was a tidal wave. News of the CEO of Ethelgard Hospitality, working undercover in her own restaurant, coupled with the explosive lawsuit filed against Holloway Development, became the city's leading story. Financial news outlets dissected the corporate espionage, while society columns revelled in the delicious downfall of a tycoon undone by a waitress he had mocked. Brendan Holloway, stripped of his bravado, became a pariah. Investors spooked by the audacity of his methods, and the stain of the scandal pulled their funding. His sleek glass and steel projects stalled, and the foundations of his empire built on arrogance and intimidation proved to be nothing more than sand. He was ruined not by a market crash or a bad investment, but by a profound failure to see the value in a human being. Catherine, however, took no pleasure in his demise. Her focus was not on the enemy she had vanquished, but on the home she had to rebuild. Her first act as the official owner of the 57th Street property was to close the Gilded Compass for 24 hours and call an all-staff meeting. The air in the main dining room was thick with anxiety. Staff gathered in nervous clusters, their whispers echoing in the unnaturally quiet space. Rumours had been swirling all morning about a corporate buyout, about the restaurant closing for good, about the strange story of Kate, the waitress. Mr. Henderson stood near the front, his face a mask of weary confusion, trying to field questions he couldn't answer. Then the main doors swung open. The woman who entered was instantly recognizable from the news reports. It was Catherine Valerius, CEO, looking every bit the part in a tailored charcoal dress that spoke of quiet authority. But as she drew closer, a wave of stunned recognition swept through the room. The face, the eyes, the determined set of her jaw, it was Kate, the quiet, clumsy waitress they had worked alongside. Leo's jaw dropped, his mind struggling to reconcile the two images. Several waitresses gasped, putting their hands to their mouths. Catherine didn't take to a stage or podium. She walked to the very center of the floor, standing among them as an equal. The room fell utterly silent. "Good morning," she began, her voice calm and resonant, carrying to every corner of the room. "My name is Catherine Valerius, but for the past month many of you have known me as Kate. I won't insult your intelligence by making excuses. I came to work here under a false identity because I needed to see the truth of this restaurant for myself. And I did." She let her gaze travel across the faces before her, the young bussers, the seasoned line, cooks, the hostesses, the dishwashers. I saw more than I ever could have from a boardroom. I saw people working double shifts for wages that don't honor their dedication. I saw incredible talent and brilliant ideas like Leo's kitchen sketches being ignored and suffocated by a broken system. I saw a manager, Mr. Henderson, fighting with everything he had to hold this family together, while the company he was loyal to was starving him of the resources he needed. And I saw a culture of fear where cruelty was tolerated and kindness was a liability. She paused, taking a breath, and the vulnerability in that small gesture was more powerful than any command. My father built this company on a simple belief that our people are our most valuable asset. Somewhere along the way, we lost sight of that. In my office, surrounded by spreadsheets and profit margins, I lost sight of that. And for my part, in letting this place and all of you suffer from that neglect, I am truly and deeply sorry. The apology landed with the force of a thunderclap. It was raw, honest, and utterly unexpected. The tension in the room didn't just break, it evaporated, replaced by a stunned, fragile hope. "But that neglect, that way of doing business ends today," she declared, her voice now imbued with a steely resolve. "Today we begin the revival of the Gilded Compass, not from the top down, but from the heart out, and that heart is all of you." Her next words sent a shockwave of pure disbelief through the staff. "Effective immediately, all hourly employees will receive a 25% wage increase. Furthermore, we are instituting a comprehensive benefits package, including full medical, dental, and a 401k matching program. And for anyone pursuing higher education, like Leo Ethelgard, will now offer tuition reimbursement. A collective gasp was followed by a rising tide of joyous, incredulous murmurs. It was life-altering news. Catherine motioned for a table to be brought forward, upon which she unrolled a large professional blueprint. This, she announced, is the plan for a complete renovation of our kitchen. It's designed for speed, creativity, and safety. The lead consultant on this project will be its original designer. She looked directly at a dumbfounded Leo. "Mr. Leo Martinez, would you please come up here?" Leo moved as if in a dream, his feet barely touching the floor. Catherine guided him to the blueprint. "Your ideas were not just good, Leo. They were visionary. Ethelgard is not only funding this redesign effective immediately, but we are also offering you a full paid scholarship to complete your architecture degree at Columbia. When you graduate, a position will be waiting for you in our Global Development Department." Tears streamed down Leo's face as he stared at his humble napkin sketch, now transformed into a blueprint for his future. Finally, Catherine turned to the man who had weathered the storm. "Mr. Henderson." The manager stood straighter, his eyes glistening. "Your decades of loyalty were repaid with budget cuts and disrespect. That is a stain on this company's honor. I am promoting you to the newly created position of Regional Director of Operations for New York. Your mission will be to serve as the advocate for our staff, to ensure the voices of our people are never, ever ignored again." Mr. Henderson, a man of quiet dignity, was unable to speak. He simply nodded, his face etched with a profound gratitude that needed no words. The months that followed were a period of dynamic rebirth. The restaurant closed for a short time as the sound of hammers and the smell of fresh paint replaced the clatter of plates. Catherine was a constant presence, not as an overseer, but as a partner, often seen in a hard hat, discussing plans with a newly confident Leo. But the true renovation was human. With fair wages, real benefits, and a leadership that valued their input, the staff was reborn. The toxic culture of fear evaporated, replaced by one of collaboration and pride. The Gilded Compass reopened not just with a polished interior and an innovative menu, but with a palpable energy of warmth and passion. It quickly became the most sought-after reservation in the city, celebrated for its renewed, vibrant soul. One crisp autumn evening, months later, Catherine sat in a quiet corner booth, observing the beautiful controlled chaos of a perfect service. The restaurant was humming alive with the buzz of happy guests and the confident, easy camaraderie of the staff. She saw Leo home for a weekend from his classes, animatedly explaining a new dish to an appreciative table. She saw Mr. Henderson moving through the room, not as a stressed manager, but as a proud patriarch. Her father's portrait still hung over the fireplace. For a long time she had looked at it and felt the weight of his legacy. But tonight, she felt only a quiet partnership. The humiliation she had endured as Kate, the ache in her feet, the sting of Brendan Holloway's contempt, those were not just painful memories. They were the crucible in which her own legacy had been forged. She had to lose her company to truly find it. She had to be stripped of her title to finally understand what it meant to lead. The Gilded Compass was more than a restaurant now. It was a promise, a new beacon for the entire Ethelgard Empire. And it was just the beginning. This story is a powerful reminder that true strength isn't displayed in expensive suits or arrogant words, but in quiet resilience and unwavering integrity. Catherine Valerius disguised as the humble waitress, Kate endured ridicule and contempt, not to seek revenge but to find the truth. She proved that a person's worth is never defined by their uniform or their bank account, but by their character. The world is full of Brendan Holloways who judge by appearances, but it is also filled with Catherine's Leos and Mr. Hendersons, whose value runs deeper than anyone can see at a glance. What did you think of Catherine's ultimate plan? Was it justice or the best kind of revenge? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched your heart and reminded you of the power of humility and courage, please give this video a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable stories that reveal the hidden heroes among us.